I'm Peter Connor. I'm the founder and CEO of Alternatively Legal. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you today about innovation and change in the legal profession. They're topics that have long been very dear to my heart and now form the sole focus of my new business, Alternatively Legal. I thought in the introductory remarks I'd talk a little bit about, explain who I am, what I've been doing, why I formed Alternatively Legal, what it does, and make some brief observations on innovation and change in the legal industry. So I started life, I suppose for me, change is something that I've always actively sought out. Maybe I'm different from a lot of other lawyers. I started life with Baker & McKenzie as a solicitor here in Sydney, then moved to the Hong Kong office, and in the late 80s I moved in-house, and for the next 25 years I worked for Sun Microsystems and Citrix Systems, two technology companies, and I had the good fortune to live in Silicon Valley, Hong Kong, the UK, Switzerland, and in Sydney, doing a variety of roles. Those roles include, I was Asia Pacific General Counsel, European General Counsel, I was head of Government Affairs, European Government Affairs. I've headed up a global legal shared services unit, which is like a captive LPO, legal process outsourcing unit. And more recently, I was the head of global compliance. Last year, I had the opportunity to play a business role. I was Vice President of Tech Products for the Red Flag Group, which is a compliance firm. And in that role, I managed software engineers, data scientists, and product managers developing a range of technology products, software platforms, databases, predictive analytics tools, and some e-learning courses. And that was terrific, a really exciting opportunity. So I think when I was thinking about returning to Australia, I'd been living in Switzerland for the last sort of 9 years, I was thinking about what I wanted to do. And I thought, what do I really enjoy doing? And frankly, it's not so much the practice of law, but rather helping others, and in particular, helping others to innovate and change. So that's what I did. I set up Alternatively Legal to do that. And the way that I do that is by providing training, consulting, coaching, and mentoring to lawyers in general, to help them improve, but in particular, to help them innovate and change. And I call my offerings, I market under the brand name Everything But the Law, which pretty much summarizes my focuses. So it's not on the law, but it's on a range of topics that I think are going to be increasingly important in the profession. So for example, things like continuous process improvement, project management, risk management, design thinking, and those sorts of things, business partnering. And I offer those on an individual basis to firms and to legal departments, both here in Australia and abroad. And I also put them together. I've combined them into a 2-day workshop, which I call Change for Legal. And that's a comprehensive program that covers all of the key areas, but also follows a process, a sort of a step-by-step process, which firms and departments could actually follow in order to implement change. Excuse me. So, and I also have another side of the business, which is probably not so relevant to the inquiry today, which is I make compliance videos. I guess it's an example of me practicing what I preach, because I've come up with an alternative approach to compliance training, but I won't go into that in any more detail today. So that gives you some background, and with that background, I'd like to make a few general observations. These observations are generalizations. I think we have to be careful because there's so many different segments of the legal industry. But the one I'm particularly talking about is commercial lawyers, and in particular, in-house commercial lawyers. So firstly, on change. I think with all this talk about change and innovation, it's easy sometimes to forget that change is really a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. So I think one of the things I spend a lot of time on with my clients is trying to figure out So what is the end? What are you trying to achieve with change and innovation? And I think as a profession, that's something we probably need to do a better job of, because if you follow change management theories and principles, then one of the first things you need to do to get people to change is to make a compelling reason for them to change and make it very personal. And I think we don't do generally a very good job of that, so that's really important. The other thing I'd say about change is that I think there's no doubt been a lot of change in the industry, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years. And firms and departments have made changes, but I don't necessarily think that lawyers have fundamentally changed the way they work. They still more or less work in the same ways, doing more or less the same things. So you might say, well, is that a problem? Well, I guess it depends. It depends on what your end is, what your objective is. What I do hear when I talk to in-house departments, a lot of lawyers say that they feel like they're doing terrific legal work, but they're not valued by their clients. It's not appreciated. They don't appreciate what they do. So I think part of the reason for that is because they're just doing legal work. And I think the opportunity for them to do more than that, to try and make a business impact, I call it business partnering. It's a topic that I've been speaking about and talking about for a long time, is an opportunity for lawyers to add more value, and something that I think will be very important in the future. On innovation, I think when you think about it, a lot of our training, both at university and even post-grad training, is really focused on improving our knowledge of the law and how to apply it. But I think increasingly it's going to be important for innovation and change to focus on other things, everything but the law. And in particular, I think two things. One, I think it's important to focus on the delivery of legal information to the people who need it, when they need it, in cheaper, faster, and more effective ways. Secondly, I think it's really important for lawyers to develop these, what I call these non-traditional skills, and then to use those to help innovate, not just for themselves, but for their clients. And I think the word "for their clients" is really interesting, because I think lawyers struggle, and I know they do because I do these exercises in my workshops, using design thinking, which is a terrific way of getting lawyers to think about things from the perspective of their clients. So I think those sorts of ideas are really important. On process is absolutely, it doesn't get the headlines that project management or technology gets, but focusing on the nuts and bolts, the operational nuts and bolts, and trying to define and to standardise to the extent possible work practices is a really important thing for lawyers and also for clients in the business. On technology, look, a lot can be said and has been said about technology. Again, it's not an end in itself. It's a means to an end, and it's often not necessarily the best means to that end. But I think, and I think if you love technology, as I do, then it's great to get into it and to code, learn how to code and all those things. But if you don't, it's not important for every lawyer to have that high level of interest and expertise. But I think generally the profession needs to improve their tech IQ, if you will, and their basic tech competence. And I think also to think about technology not just to improve internal efficiency, but how to apply technology to help clients. I think that's another area that sort of gets overlooked. On diversity, two quick things. One, lots of things will be said, and I'm trying to add additional comments to what might be said later. On diversity, two things. Firstly, I think that there's an increasing importance for lawyers to develop a greater diversity of legal and business knowledge and expertise. But traditionally, I think lawyers, particularly in firms, tend to specialise. In fact, that's one of the reasons I left private practice. I actually liked being more of a generalist. And I think that by doing that, by having a broader business and legal knowledge base, I think you can add more value for clients. And secondly, on diversity, I think there's a new trend which I think will increase for firms and departments to hire not just lawyers, but and not just admin back office staff, but people with skills like technology skills, project management skills, process improvement skills, operational skills, in front office roles, customer-facing roles, where they may be leading the engagement and the lawyer may be taking a back seat. Now, all of that's going to be quite a challenge for lawyers because lawyers are used to being out in front. So I think this working in more collaborative ways is going to be interesting. And finally, on the future of the profession, I think that it's easy to be a little bit pessimistic about the future if you think about technology replacing the work that lawyers do, and if you think about the mismatch between the number of law graduates and the number of traditional jobs in traditional firms. But I think that if lawyers are willing to embrace change, to learn those non-traditional skills, and to think about non-traditional roles, not necessarily just in law firms, I think the future is not only bright, it's actually quite exciting.
Can I just take up on that last point, that lawyers are getting more involved in non-traditional roles? Can you just expand on that for me?
Okay. So I was invited by Adrian Aegis, one of the previous presenters here, to speak at the New South Wales Law School Hackathon. And a lot of the students there, was interesting. I was talking to them privately, and they said they're quite concerned about their future. And I thought about these people, and in the course of 3 days, they're developing these really exciting applications. It was incredible what they came up with. And I said to them, your skills, you may not get a job as a lawyer advising on the law, but you might get a job working with technology to help develop apps and technology solutions, or at least advising the other people in the firm and helping them. I think the younger generation could actually lead the way here, and there's lots of opportunities for them. I think there will be over time.
The areas of change that you've been looking at have an in-house focus. Can you give us some examples of how changes have been implemented in-house and what impact that has had on the lawyers that work there, and how have they adapted?
Right. So I think, in my opinion, and obviously it's a big generalisation, there's a lot of variation through geographies and between companies and firms, but I would say that I think there's been two waves of change so far, generally speaking. One, the first wave, let's call it change 1.0 to use the tech analogy, has been really a focus on costs and getting costs under control and perhaps even reducing them. And that's mainly focused on outside counsel spend and using some technology perhaps to help that. And I think that's something that works okay, although some lawyers even struggle with that a little bit. Secondly, I think the next wave has really been for those who are a little further along the innovation maturity curve. I think there are those that are focusing on efficiency, particularly in the contracting area. And I think that, again, I think that some have been successful, but it's true, it does require a certain change of practices, and lawyers have struggled a little bit with changing the way they work in order to fit in with some of these systems. But I think the third wave, which really hasn't started yet, and I think it's the exciting one, is when you can actually start changing the way you're working. You're doing different things, and that's going to be that's not many people are doing that yet.
Just explain what you mean by changing the way you work.
Well, as I was saying earlier, I think there's a big opportunity for lawyers to do more than just provide legal advice. So there's really two pieces to doing that. One is creating the time to do that, because everyone's pretty busy, right, doing that. So there's things you need to do to create that time. And then secondly, once you've got that time, then actually having the skills, the confidence, and the ability to actually interact and give business advice and get involved with helping the business. That's what I see as the future especially for in-house counsel.
You talked about different geographies, and I assume by that you meant what is happening outside Australia.
Right.
Are your experiences overseas in relation to change and what's been happening there, is that any different to what's happening in Australia, or do we pretty much mirror what's going on there?
Yeah, it's good. I think we're all struggling with the same issues. It's not like there's unique issues here, but I would say that, the level of, as I said, there's a spectrum of where firms and individuals are on that spectrum. And I think that varies. It's fair to say that I think in the States, and I do a lot of work with US clients, they are further along the curve, generally speaking. And then in Europe as well, Asia's perhaps further behind, generally speaking. But here in Australia, I've noticed that since I only started the business about a year ago, that within that year, I've seen a greater interest in sort of what I'm talking about. So if that's a reflection of things, then there you go.
Thank you very much, Peter. Two of us on the commission here are in-house, so quite interested to hear your reflections on how in-house can add value. And it's something that I think I'm acutely aware of, that being in-house, there's an opportunity to assist the client, your very large client, in a business sense. Can I ask a very specific technical question? And that's in relation to privilege. Fantastic opportunities, and I can see the opportunities for job satisfaction when a lawyer does more than provide the technical legal advice and gets involved in the business, as you suggested, in terms of embracing change. And there are many positives that can come out of that, because a lawyer has legal training and can provide strategic advice and add value in that regard. How, in terms of your training for in-house legal teams, are you addressing the privilege aspect and the concept of protecting the client's privilege of the legal advice as opposed to getting involved at the business end?
It's a great question. It's one of many concerns that lawyers have about, let's call it business partnering. But just to address that concern, in my 25 years experience in-house, I didn't ever have one situation where that became a practical problem. So that's the first point. Secondly, I think if you're dealing with something that, let's face it, if there's a dispute and something's, potentially could end up in court, then of course you've got the opportunity of involving legal counsel and external legal counsel, and that's one way, of course, you're going to treat that issue. And then I think, thirdly, just simply differentiating between when you're giving legal advice on the one hand and when you're giving business advice.
You focus primarily on in-house counsel. Is it something very different about their behaviour and their setup from, external counsel?
Yeah, I think the issues that they're facing and the challenges are the same, but I think their situation's a little bit different. The reason I'm focusing on them is because actually, just a practical thing, departments have been interested in what I'm offering more so than firms at this stage, but also because that's where my experience is. But I think in-house are in a unique place, and I actually think in-house counsel and in-house lawyers, the trend is, of course, for them, there's a greater number of them, and I think their influence and their opportunity to influence change is going to increase significantly because they're there with the client, with the business, the ultimate client, the business person. And they're in a position, often a unique position, at the intersection of a lot of different parts of the business where they can actually do more than just give legal advice. So even though they may not have marketing skills, finance skills, I think lawyers, with the skills they have learned, skills like analytical skills, communication skills, those sorts of things, I think they're fantastically placed to really add value and to really embrace this business partnering concept that I was talking about.
In your experience, are in-house legal teams and their general counsel embracing diversity in the context of gender diversity or ethnicity?
Yes, they are, particularly in the States. To be honest, my experience with departments here in Australia is just new, and I'm just getting to meet a few of them, so I'm not sure if I'm qualified to comment here. But certainly in the States, they definitely are. Take it very seriously.